The Rip City Drive.
And welcome back to the Rip City Drive with Preston and Dwight. Joining us now over the phones live from gorgeous San Diego, California. Couldn't be more opposite from the weather we're having in Portland lately. Erik Skopil, my guy, who I've known for a long time. He's been on the Oregon beat for a long time after graduating from Gonzaga, following all things Ducks. And Erik, I'm glad to hear that you made it down to San Diego safely. And despite the fact that it felt like many Americans had their holiday plans, travel plans thwarted, you made it down just fine.
I had a very low-key travel day, and it's not my story to tell, but I'm going to tell it anyway, of my colleague, Matt Preem, who works at Duck Territory, and James Crepia from the Oregonian, two of my good friends who had to drive in a Toyota Tacoma 15 hours from Eugene to San Diego on Christmas night through the night to get from San Diego a couple of days ago. They are down here. We've had numerous other people on the Oregon beat not able to make it out. One of our reporters was back home in Boston for the holidays. His Southwest flight got canceled. Had a couple of local TV reporters who I just think aren't making it down at all, or if they are, they're getting here day of the game. It is wild. Dan Lanning said it's not just hitting reporters. Dan Lanning said his parents had to their flight from Kansas City. He actually kind of one-upped James and Matt at the press conference. They drove 15 hours. He said his parents had to drive from Kansas City 23 hours. I don't know if I think that's still in progress because their flights were canceled. So not a good look for Southwest. I know there's a lot of Oregon fans who probably aren't making it down, or if they are, they've had to make last-minute adjustments. But for me, hey, I got on a United flight. I'm going to give United props because mine wasn't canceled, and I got down here with no problems on Saturday.
Dude, I'm really glad to hear that, man. Not even Oregon's coach could get his parents in through the air, so that's crazy. I'm glad that you were able to get down there just fine, though. And I wanted to kind of tap into travel before we get into this Holiday Bowl. Were the players, coaches, anyone affected by this? Do you know, were there any tardy appearances or perhaps even absences from either side that you know of?
No, I'm not aware of any. At least I haven't heard anything like that. I think it's mostly. I mean, because you've seen the national stories. I think Pittsburgh a couple of players had to hitch a ride with the UTEP men's basketball coach from the airport in Pittsburgh down to Texas El Paso a couple of days ago. Yeah. I haven't heard a story like that. I know it for a fact. There are players, parents, and family members who are, again, relying on air travel from various parts of the country to get into San Diego that have now had to switch routes, whether that be paying an arm and a leg. I mean, I've looked at the prices. If you're trying to fly from anywhere in the country to San Diego now, you're looking. They're like upcharged it. You're looking at like $1,000 plus just to make it out here. So I know a lot of people have had to pivot to either paying a lot or to investing more time by getting it in the SUV and family SUV and driving from wherever they're from. So it probably doesn't impact that high percentage of players' families, but I know Bo Nix's family, I believe, is also making some sort of a drive west from where they're from in Alabama. I don't know any other specifics, but those are the ones that I've heard either on or off record.
Okay, perfect segue as we start to talk ball here with Erik Skopil, 24/7 Sports. Bo Nix announces via social media and through a pretty cool video that him and the UO put out that he's returning to Oregon as the Ducks quarterback for next season. Obviously, that's huge news for the Ducks. He's a Heisman caliber player in college football. What was your instant reaction to that news? Were you surprised, and how big is that for Oregon next year?
There was, it's funny because during the season, there was very little rumbling about him maybe coming back for 23. I think, I don't know if he said it outright, but there was just a sense that, okay, he did his time. His 3 years at Auburn, he was coming out for his final season, and that was going to be it for college. But, we were getting close to the end of the season. I want to say maybe around the Washington game, and there were starting to become some rumblings of like, he's actually kind of taking a real look at maybe doing another year in Eugene and spending more time here, which I know ultimately ends up being a big shock to those that maybe weren't hearing those things, because you look at it and you go, the guy had an incredibly successful season. One of the big reasons he came to Oregon was Kenny Dillingham is now the head coach at Arizona State, so that's no longer a factor. The NFL draft, I don't know exactly where his stock is, but I would be very surprised had he entered if he wouldn't have gone somewhere in the 4th, 6th round range, somewhere in there. I don't think he's going much higher than that, but, just based upon some of the physical measurables and stuff. But this is a guy who has proven this year to be an extremely capable college quarterback, and the response to his message that was shared on social media, about a week or so ago, whatever it was, it was really significant. I think, in this sport, you need a quarterback to compete. Oregon knows that because following Justin Herbert, they had 2 seasons that I think are looked at as being disappointments, in part because quarterback play wasn't very good. I know Mac Brown talked about, he was asked a pointed question about, Drake May and his decision. There's apparently some transfer portal buzz and the significance of him making a similar decision to stick it out with North Carolina, of saying, and I haven't fact-checked this stat, but according to Mac Brown, 7 of the ACC starting quarterbacks this year are all in the portal. That's like half the league starting quarterbacks. Like, there is so much turnover right now, and that creates a lack of continuity at the most important position. So for Oregon, I think you can at least just say, right, hey, there's things to work on. Certainly, the defense is a work in progress. There's going to be some things along the offensive line. They've hit the portal, added some players, but you can at least now say, hey, we've got one of the better quarterbacks. We've got a quarterback that can keep us competitive against most teams on Saturdays in a conference which frankly had, I think you could argue, one of the better complement of quarterbacks across the country this last season. You're seeing Colorado getting some buzz now with Deion Sanders' son, who was a standout at Jackson State, one of the best players at that level. So the conference should be really competitive at quarterback. And if you're Oregon, hey, now you're at least keeping up in the arms race.
All right, Eric, that brings to mind another question. Number one, is Bo going to be back to where he was completely healthy? And along those lines, related question, who's in and who's out for the Ducks? Not only injury-wise, but have there been players that are just choosing not to play in the game?
Yeah, so the first one, unfortunately, we haven't had a chance to speak with Bo for about 10 days, but yeah. But 10 days ago, he was saying he was feeling a lot better. I think that's a really positive indication. It's now been since the Washington game. It's been about 6 weeks since that game. That should be, I think, enough time to heal from an ankle injury. Dan was asked today kind of indirectly about his health and everything, and he basically said, hey, it's great when you have about a month to heal up from playing, right? They played and had that devastating loss to the Beavers, it's going to be roughly a month from when they play tomorrow. That gives him hopefully enough time to be healthy. What I'll be curious, Dwight, to be honest, is so much of their success early on in the season was due to the dual threat nature of Bo Nix, right? Yeah. Such a dynamic threat, both as a runner and as a passer. How much of the design run stuff, how many of the design QB draws or the RPOs, how much of that stays in the offense where he's a staple as a runner? That part I don't have clarity, but I expect he's got to be at least able to tuck it and run and be dynamic as a scrambler, which was again so much of his success early. To your second one, in terms of transfer portal opt-outs, 16 players hit the transfer portal. Only about 2 or 3 of them are playing real roles on this team, though. Maliki Madava was in and out of the lineup as a starter at tight end. He will not be playing. He's committed to Chip Kelly and UCLA to play his the remaining seasons of his college football. So that's probably the biggest hit offensively. Dante Thornton was a big-time receiver who was also in and out of the starting lineup, but mostly only in the lineup when Chase Cota was hurt. So that's another loss. That's kind of it offensively. Defense is where they've taken the biggest hit with opt-outs, with DJ Johnson, the team in sacks. He will not be playing. Christian Gonzalez, I'd say, was their best defensive player this season. At corner, probably the only real bright spot in that secondary, which was, frankly, I think anybody who watched the team, a pretty big issue almost all season. Just not a lot of high-end play there. But Christian Gonzalez certainly was one of the few XSS bright spots. And then Noah Sewell, one of the more recognizable figures on this team, has also chosen to opt out and not play in this game. So those are the big ones on defense, for this team. You're kind of losing your top defensive lineman, your top linebacker, your top corner. And then I was just talking about, we have on our Odds and Audibles podcast, I'll plug that for a second here, of kind of like, those are, you only probably see about 4 or 5 maybe starter caliber players not playing. I should say only, because that minimizes it, but that doesn't feel like a huge number. The bigger issue is you had 16 total players hit the portal, which means you're down about 20 in total for this game. And that means you're injury away from somebody who maybe hasn't really played at all at this level playing a big role, right? Like like hypothetically, if Chase Cota goes down, like Dante Thornton, earlier in the year would have come in and you've got a serviceable replacement. Well, now you'd be looking at maybe a guy who hasn't really played any meaningful snaps at Oregon, filling in. So that's kind of where I think almost the bigger concern is the depth of, you're now playing with about 65 scholarship players as opposed to the 85 you have for the season.
Let's shift over to Carolina now. So Phil Longo, their OC, leaves for Wisconsin. I believe, and I listened to your guys' podcast the other day with the insider that you had on. He mentioned Josh Downs, who's basically a 1,000-yard receiver, 11 touchdowns. He will not play in this game, as I understand it. So that is a loss for Carolina. That being said, they're do-everything quarterback Drake May is back. I think looking at it from a positive standpoint, just in terms of the quality of this game, there's going to be two pretty awesome quarterbacks here. I mean, May can absolutely deal it. Oregon fans know that Bo Nix is a sweet dual-threat player. What are your thoughts just kind of on this matchup and on UNC's current state as they started the season hot, 9-1, and then they've lost 3 in a row, including kind of a beatdown to Clemson in that conference title game. But just your thoughts on kind of the state of Carolina and then how things will play out.
Yeah, Preston, if you listened to our podcast, it sounds like you did. You heard me kind of responding to our guest, who is Ross Martin from Inside Carolina, the 24/7 affiliate covering the Tar Heels. I said a couple of times, like, man, that sounds so familiar to Oregon. And I just think their seasons played out really similarly, where you had an early tough loss to a good team. Oregon lost to Georgia in the second game of the season. For North Carolina, it was an early loss to Notre Dame. But then they rattle off all of these wins, and suddenly they're not just in their own conference championship hunt, but they're kind of like, maybe hovering around if they could win out, sneaking into the college football playoff discussion. But then both teams really just kind of fell apart late. And as you said, Carolina lost 3 straight. Oregon lost 2 of their final 3 games, both to rivals and really close games. So the season has kind of a weird complexion for both, where they've won 9 games, and that sounds great for most programs. Like 9 wins is an outcome that is certainly a success for North Carolina. I think for Oregon, it's probably seen as kind of a, not a disappointment, but not quite where you hope things would get to. But so you're entering this game with just like, these are 2 teams where a month ago or 2 months ago, you're like, man, these are having special years. And now it's kind of muted some of that enthusiasm, I would say, from probably both fan bases. And of course, North Carolina, that's not a big deal. They can go focus on their one of their best basketball programs in the country. They've got other things to focus on. But certainly kind of strange how both teams have kind of had such similar seasons and enter in kind of weird spots. Both teams also without their offensive coordinators in this game, who went and took jobs elsewhere. So there's another added similarity. And then we touched on it. I think the other part is these quarterbacks are both really dynamic. And in fact, strangely, statistically, kind of similar too. I think both have accounted for exactly 42 touchdowns this year, which is near the national lead. And at one point they were, I believe, tied at some point in mid-November for the national lead in total touchdowns. If you combine passing, rushing, and then Bo Nix, he has the 1 receiving touchdown for the season. So really, it's going to be a really fun matchup from a quarterback perspective. I don't think there's any question. And these are 2 guys that have both already communicated they're coming back for next year, and I think figured to be, at least in contention to make their way to New York for the Heisman Trophy ceremony. I don't know if either will be looked at as a favorite necessarily. Some will come down to team success, but both of them will be both of their names will be on the board in Las Vegas going into the season in some capacity. I think for the they'll have some odds up there for winning or the trophy. So these are 2 really high-end quarterbacks. May is a really interesting case of a guy who this is his first year as a starting quarterback. North Carolina legacy. Dad played at Carolina. Had brother who was a standout, Luke May, for the Tar Heels. Gosh, several years ago. People probably remember some of his heroics and some of his success. This is the younger brother, and Drake, again, first-year starter, redshirted last year behind a really good quarterback in Sam Howell, and who I think statistically is one of the better quarterbacks the Tar Heels have ever had. And he's kind of stepped in and filled in, and honestly, maybe, I don't want to say outshine, but has certainly put his mark on this program. And, I kind of made a comment a couple of days ago. It's sort of like the Justin Herbert kind of guy, where he's a really talented young player. I'm not saying they're going to be the same NFL player, because I think Herbert's fantastic, but with ties to the program, and they're local, and I think are just so appreciated in that community. And Justin Herbert, when he's in Eugene, it's a big deal for people in Eugene. I think it's kind of the same thing, in North Carolina, in Charlotte, where he's from, and in Chapel Hill, where the school's at, where he's going to be looked at for a long time as just one of these really special kind of figures in that program. And to already be saying those kind of things, the kind of thing that Mac Brown said earlier today about what he means to those communities, after 1 year as a starter, I think it just speaks to his talent. So super gifted player, really talented. It's going to be, like Nix, also capable of tucking it and running. It's going to be a really fun matchup against two defenses, which statistically were bad already this season, but have been completely depleted, as I stated. Not completely, but have been hit for sure by the portal and opt-outs to the point where it's like, I don't think you expect either defense to be particularly good. So this game could push the Holiday Bowl scoring record, which I looked up earlier today, is 91 points set in 1980. I don't know if that's going to go down or not, but certainly kind of a number to maybe keep your eye on, go throughout this game if it gets high scoring of, okay, if they get over 91, that'll set the new bowl record for this bowl, at least from a scoring perspective.
Eric, when we look at bowl games, very often, it's almost a cliche, in fact, very often we look at it and say, okay, which team needs this game more or wants this game more? Do you have any kind of feel now about motivation on either side that might decide this game?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting part of this because, as I said earlier, I think both teams had kind of similar seasons where it felt like there was a lot more on the table, where it was, it wasn't long ago where Oregon kind of felt like, man, we're in the driver's seat to play in the Rose Bowl. We might be in the college football playoff. And now they're at, and again, I don't want to diminish this bowl, but a bowl that isn't looked at anywhere near the same significance. And this season has a different taste in a lot of Oregon fans' mouths than it did midway through November when they were in position. They had the one loss to Georgia, but they'd rattled off all these wins, and they just had this final stretch to get through. Well, they slipped up a couple of times, and I think there's certainly a level of motivation to finish this season right. But that same motivation can be shared by the Tar Heels, who, again, had a very similar year. They were 9-1. Looked like they could have a chance to play for something special, and yet they lose their last three games, and here they are in San Diego. I think another thing Mac Brown shared that was kind of interesting was, they want to atone not just for how they finished the regular season, but for last year's bowl game. They got absolutely drubbed a year ago in their bowl game, and Mac said that was one of the most disappointing outcomes he's had as a head football coach. The guy who's been around forever, 71 years old, 30-plus years as a head coach at some huge schools, won national championships, lots of highs, probably not too many lows quite like that, but he just said that they came away feeling like certain players just didn't play very hard, just didn't play hard enough. And so his message to this team this year is if Oregon's better, they're going to beat us, but don't let it be a situation where I have to question anybody's intensity or focus going into this game. And so it certainly seems like North Carolina's motivated. I know Oregon's motivated from what I've heard. So I don't know if there's anybody who wants it more, but I think for both programs there is a sense of you can go into the offseason with a positive after, finishing a season on kind of a negative note. I think either team that loses is you're going to look at it and go, gosh, if you're Oregon, boy, you lost 3 of your last 4 games. That's kind of a disappointment, especially because that's exactly what happened a year ago where they struggled down the stretch. You'd love to have a different outcome here where you could finish with a victory. And as I said with North Carolina, they're in a similar spot where if they were to lose this game, that's 4 straight to lose the season when you started it with 9 wins out of your first 10 games. So I think both teams have quite a bit to play for.
Eric, thanks so much for your time, man. We really appreciate you carving out a few minutes for us, and enjoy San Diego, enjoy the game. And I think for your sake, I hope that they do set the over-under 75, but I do hope they set that Holiday Bowl record so you got a great headline to write about if that happens.
Yeah, and it'll make it worth it for all the people that had a hard time getting out here. If there's a lot of points scored, right, wouldn't that be better for all the reporters and the family of the players and the families of the coaches and all the fans? If there was a lot of points scored, that'd be a better outcome. Let's hope for that.
As long as it's not 91-0.
There you go. Yeah, that's right. That would be sour for one side for sure.
Yeah.
Eric, my man, appreciate it, man. Safe travels back home. Enjoy the game out there.
All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.